And we're live with GC Squared Live. Tonight we have a real serious topic today, and it's going to be about how to help those who are grieving, how to help those who are hurting. So we all have loved ones that are affected by grief. Often we're at a loss as to how to help these loved ones, or even worse, sometimes we find that our efforts to help them actually end up hurting them more.
Right.
So how can we be able to even approach this subject? In fact, this particular subject is probably very important because, as we can even just see from the statistics, a lot of people must be grieving this Christmas. So, like, for instance, in 2017, there were 2,744,248 deaths. And then also, as far as divorces, there were 827,261 divorces. So now there are many different causes for loss and grief. In fact, illness, perhaps you're struggling with some type of chronic illness, and that can be anything from diabetes to heart disease to fibromyalgia, IBS, depression, chronic migraines, multiple sclerosis. The list goes on and on. The reality is that all the people around us may smile and laugh, and sometimes even act quite normal, but often we are not aware of the depth of the struggle that they endure just to get through each day.
That's right. That's right.
So
it can be really, really difficult.
Right. So even though we live in a society that is a pill for everything, doctors don't completely understand how to be able to address these things. And a lot of these things are issues of the heart. So the thing is how can we really know how to love them well? And later on in the show, we're going to bring on a guest that has endured grief and helped others through grief, and cannot wait to be able to get him on to be able to talk to him about these things. But as C.S. Lewis, in his Grief Observed, says that he was describing these moments of crisis, really, is you never know how much you really believe anything until its truth or falsehood becomes a matter of life and death to you. It is easy to say you believe a rope to be strong and sound as long as you're merely using it to cord a box. But suppose that you hang by that rope over a precipice. Wouldn't you then discover how much you really trusted it? So, Paul, this is my co-host, Paul Watson. How you doing today, Paul?
Hey, Beck, doing okay.
So, you know what? So I think what this quote is basically saying is that we can say a lot of things like, a lot of truths and stuff about the Bible, but what about those moments in which it's a matter of life or death to us, which a lot of times is the point in which we're grieving the hardest. And, and those truths start to become come alive to us, or it becomes a crisis.
In fact, I would actually go on to say that until our faith has been tested through crisis, we really don't know its quality. We don't know if we can really cling to those things. We don't know how it's going to sustain us through it. That crisis is actually that moment where we can cling to it more, or we may decide to run.
And the thing is that when we come into Christmas, again, we have to be sensitive. A lot of people would think like, yay, it's just a fun season filled with family and everything. But we have to be sensitive that some people, it's a time of real pain, or maybe just a time of remembrance that at one time it was a happy time and now not anymore. And so think about the different things to help you understand who may be grieving around you. Because again, sometimes the people who grieve are hiding it behind a smile. Maybe it's going through somebody who's going through, not obviously there's the obvious ones, if they've recently had one that died, or maybe they're going through a divorce or something. But what if they just recently lost their job? Or perhaps, they're struggling with some type of chronic illness. And again, because it's chronic, so in other words, it may be years that they've been dealing with it. Sometimes it doesn't trigger to us that they're going through something really hard right now, and maybe even grieving at this particular time.
Exactly. And what we don't realize a lot of times is that.
And so a lot of times as we're looking into these things, we're not realizing that the people around us are actually hurting. And sometimes it can even be a death of a loved one that has happened several years ago. And so a lot of times what we don't understand about grief, and this is the principle of grief, it's not quickly dealt with.
Bring it back.
These things come back, and as almost like the ghost of Christmas, past or something like that. These type of ghosts come back to haunt us as we go along life and along life's journey. So we can't always assume that, just because somebody, died or went through something hard, or that it's a long lasting thing, that pain isn't just as real as it was before.
Yeah, and I think you made an interesting point. Just because somebody has a smile on their face doesn't mean that they're not grieving on the inside, because you got to understand that most people don't want to be the downer in the party. They don't want to bring the one in. They don't want to bring everyone that's supposed to be happy during this time into their pain and experiences as well. And so I know that I myself, and I'm pretty sure that you've done this too, Rebecca, is that inside there have been times where we've been completely miserable, and we've worn that smile, whether it was because we walked into church or we walked into the living room, just because we believe that the expectation was that we be happy people. In fact, we were talking about this before the show, is that sometimes in Christian circles, that happiness, that showing grief too much is almost sinful, because we have to pretend that everything is okay. Because if we really love Jesus, then everything would be okay, right? I mean, that's the way it was. That's the way that we're taught. That's the expectation.
Well, that says something as that's a definite principle of grief that we have to remember, that grief isn't a sin. In fact, it's one of the ways that we know that grief isn't sin, because Jesus grieved. It says that he said when it comes to, like, for instance, at Lazarus' grave, he wept over at his grave. He wept over Jerusalem, and also, not to mention, he commands us. So again, if this is a sin, God wouldn't command us to weep with those who weep. He also wouldn't tell us to bear one another's burdens. Now, he wasn't just talking about a literal, like, hey, if they were carrying a heavy backpack. No, burden, and one of them is grief, and to help bear those burdens. In fact, our call is for us to do that. And a lot of times we shy away from people who are grieving. And I hate to say this, not just because we don't know how, but because we know it's going to be hard, and we don't want to do things that are hard. And so it's much easier to just kind of run away from those who are grieving, instead of actually, embracing the hardship along with them, and that's what we're called to do.
I would actually go as far to say that when you are someone who's grieving, whether it's because of a divorce or a loved one or things like that, that they feel that there's this line that if they cross it, that everybody has a level that they'll endure their grief, that they will maintain the friendship with this person who is sad. And if you cross that line with a person, then they begin to withdraw. And if you cross it too often or too far, then you might lose the friendship entirely. And so I think that a lot of times people who are grieving, and I know I've done this, people who are grieving will hesitate to share with the complete story or all of their grief with anyone at one time, because they're worried that they'll lose what few friends they have. And the idea in the middle of grief or in the middle of chronic illness that you'll lose the few friends that you have is completely terrifying. I mean, completely terrifying, because what's worse than grieving? Well, grieving alone.
Right. Well, and the thing is that we have another principle for us to remember, is that when it comes to the problem of suffering, and when it comes to the problem of grieving, is that it's more than just a rational problem. It's more than just like a mental problem of trying to decipher truth. It's also an emotional problem. It's an existential problem. So in other words, it's not helpful for us to only just say, tell people, well, don't you know God's good, and don't you know this truth and that whatever truth? Because while that can be helpful, the thing is that there's also this emotional component, that there is real hardship of the emotions that have to be borne and addressed. And so, being with them, comforting them in a way that is more on the emotional side is really part of what's being able to be needed. Now, another big thing is for us to remember, and this is another big principle, is Grief is not for something for you to fix. You're not supposed
Right.
to fix somebody's grief. You're supposed to walk them through the grief, be with
Very
them
good.
through the grief. That's a lot of times where we go wrong. We come and we got to be like, they feel sad and we have to fix it. And so that's
Yeah.
where we start trying to come up with reasons as to why this happened. And, oh, you have to try this and you have to do that. And you have to, I got to cheer them up. It's like, no, it's like, we're not here to fix grief. We're here to help walk them through it. So
Exactly.
now, and again, just a few things for us to remember before we bring on our guest is that the qualities of grief. So remember that grief is very isolating.
Yeah.
So and this kind of hardship, but the things that cause grief is isolating. And so, also that it causes low emotional energy. So for instance, if you, text somebody, and say, hey, how are you doing? I know you're going through a hard time, and they don't answer you. It's not because they don't care or because they, that didn't help. It just, they literally may not have the emotional energy to call you back or to text you.
Yeah, and I know for me that often when I'm grieving that I am easily triggered. That it does not take much to put me over that edge of my stress scale, and something that wouldn't have bothered me normally would send me right over the edge, and I would explode on everyone or burst into tears. And I don't know exactly what it is. And oftentimes I won't know what caused me to be pushed over the edge until I look back on it an hour or two later when the emotions have come back down.
And that brings up into another quality of grief is the fact that a person will be easily triggered and unpredictable in their behavior. And it's not just, because they're crazy. It's just that's the essence of how grief is that it makes us raw and makes us, unable to handle life as we normally know it. And
Right.
but however, it is very important to note that people who are grieving aren't stupid. They're
That's right.
just grieving. So sometimes we can be, how should I say, we can be kind of condescending
Mm-hmm.
or, maybe treat them in such a way that makes them feel like a child. And that's really unhelpful. That disrespect, that unintentional, even at times disrespect, will actually hurt them more. So keep on reminding yourself as you talk to them, they're not stupid. They're not, being juvenile. They're just grieving. And this is something that really hurts.
And there's nothing that you can do that's going to snap them out of it. In fact, they don't need to be snapped out of it. They need to be allowed to grieve, and we need to walk with them. So
Exactly. Now, the last thing to remember is that a lot of times grief can strike to the very core of a person. It could be something that the thing that caused this grief to happen could be something that would get to the level of their identity or a complete change of the landscape of life. So their very basis of security is threatened. And so that grief is, and the things that cause grief can really get to a very deep level with people. And so you have to realize that this is not just something that's just going to go away in a quick period of time. And that's why we have to be sensitive and patient and very gracious.
yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that there's anyone that I know that's more sensitive and more gracious for people going through grief than our guest, Stephen Shomler, is coming up. So
Absolutely. Stephen Shomler, as he's coming on right now. Hey, Stephen, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Doing well,
Great
thanks.
today. Stephen, I was just coming on with your introduction as you have on your Facebook. You said on February 8th, 2016, your 17-year-old son, Zane, passed away, and then you began a brutal grieving journey.
Yep, that's exactly right. And prior to that, for a number of years, I taught grieving pastorally. And so everything I taught, I now got the joy of putting into practice. I say joy in
Oh
quotes.
my goodness. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Zane's older brother and younger brother, when they went through the grieving process, would say, "We hear your words in our head, Dad, all the things you taught," which wasn't necessarily helpful for their ache.
Well, thank you so
Right.
much, Stephen, for coming on the show and sharing your heart with us and your experience both in helping people through grief and also going through that journey yourself is so valuable, and we want to thank you for that.
My pleasure. Anything particular that I can that would be
Yeah.
helpful? Paul,
So
what's on your heart?
what were some things that
What are some things that you
what were-
feel like are? Oh, I'm so sorry. I must have
what
had a
were-
lag. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's
must have
okay.
had
That's
a lag on
okay.
my end.
What were some of the things, Stephen, that you've taught a lot of grief, you've read a lot about grief, you've done the pastoral grief stuff. What were some of the things when you went through grief of your own that you found to be completely BS in our explanation of grief, and then some of the things that you found to be very spot on and very helpful to you?
Well, the things I taught I found to be very helpful and accurate. But I had a pretty dark childhood and a lot of grieving of that, and so the things I taught came out of a grieving journey. The things that were pretty difficult for me when Zane died, Christians were pretty awful. A lot of them lack emotional maturity or willingness to grieve or to be present when people are grieving, or they have a theology that hinders their grieving. So I found them to be almost distasteful, and I just couldn't stand to be around them. I knew not to say this. I had taught people not to say this, but one of the things you said earlier in the show, Paul, was that the only thing worse than grieving with others is grieving alone, and that's not true. The worst thing is grieving with people who don't want you to grieve.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm opposed to violence, but there's two things you can say that make me want to stab a fork into your shoulder. If you will say to someone, it will get better when they're grieving, as a way to comfort them, because it's not going to get better. My son Zane's dead, and he's not coming back, and it doesn't get better. The ache will change and lessen, but it doesn't get better. It's not like a cold that you get over or a toothache that heals.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that's incredibly helpful to say is don't cry, because crying and grieving is how we heal. And nothing sickens me more than when people tell someone, "Oh, don't cry." Well, no, they need to cry. That's how they get it out.
Yeah.
I teach and found it's in my own journey very, very true that grieving is like going to the bathroom. When you don't do it, bad things happen.
Right. That's a great way.
You get emotional constipation, right?
You do.
Constipation, and it's a real thing.
It is,
Yeah.
I now know, I can sense when someone is at a loss and they haven't grieved. I can feel it. I can feel that, and it screws up their entire life. And sometimes they get angry, they closed off, they get crabby, they get shut down. But you have to at some point let it out. And one of the things that you gave a lot of really good descriptions of what grieving is, but one of the things I wrote, listening to you guys, is grieving is scary. I tried to buy the domain snotbubbles.com. It was not available. So instead, I bought that uglycry.com, because depending on the intensity of the loss for you, you may need to do the kind of grieving where you are crying so hard you want to get on the bed, but you can't make it onto the bed, and you're on the floor, and horrible noises are coming out of you, and you've got that ugly cry where snot bubbles are coming out of your nose, and it can be kind of scary to grieve that much. But depending on the loss, how you experience the loss, and we can't quantify loss. For some people, losing a pet they've been with them for a long time can be just as difficult for someone else losing a spouse. You can't quantify grief. People want to quantify loss, and you can't. Loss is loss, and it hurts however much it hurts. But people can be scared of the intensity of emotion, and that can kind of stop them from entering into it and then letting that grief out.
That actually, when you say that, Steve, I really feel that it's really not in step even what we see in the scriptures. I mean, when it comes to the Jews, like whenever they grieved, they tore their clothes, ripped out their beards, and sat in sackcloth and ashes when there was something that bad happened. But we're afraid to even just cry. I mean, what is wrong with our society?
So talk to me, Stephen. I know that before we got on the show, and I think I want to give you permission to dive into this, that how does maybe our theological understanding of how God works affect our ability to grieve or might hinder our ability to grieve. I think that that's good, and I want to ask you to say it.
Oh boy, here we go, folks.
There we go. I think it's good. I think it's something, guys, the reason we have a show like this is to give you something to talk about. You don't have to agree with everything we're saying, but what's more flattering to Rebecca and myself is if you go home and you sit down and you talk about it around the dinner table and you come to really good, meaningful conversation. And so I would like Stephen to jump into this because I think it's important.
So I don't want to hurt anybody's heart, and I think a lot of Christians major in the minors, and so some of the things that they're really aware about aren't really that important. From a Christian perspective, I think, Paul, you would think you don't care if they believe in. I want to put words in your mouth, but I think to give context to this, I don't think you care whether they believe in creation or evolution. You just want them to come to know Jesus, and then let their walk with Jesus sort that out. And you wouldn't say they need to embrace creation as a theory prior to saying yes to Jesus. But a lot of Christians, particularly in some tribes, the right theology is what determines your value. So I'm not trying to hurt anybody's heart, but I have seen many, many people, Calvinism, God always gets his way here on planet Earth, and God wanted it to happen. And there's various extremes, and some people are Calvinistic and don't know it. And then there's Arianism, which is another form of theology where God doesn't always get his way here on planet Earth. And I'm not, whatever someone believes is fine with me. I don't really care in one sense, as long as your theology doesn't hinder you and cause you to end up separating from God. Because I've seen where, the 3-year-old gets run over by a drunk driver, and it's a Christian family, and they decide, well, if that's what God wanted, some of them say, well, that's what God wanted, and we don't understand it, but fine. But others, well, if that's what God did, then God's a jerk and I reject it. And they walk away from faith altogether because they didn't have a workable theology that said, no, God doesn't necessarily always get his way. And I think, when Jesus said, Lord, your will be done on heaven as it is on earth, I think that validates that God doesn't always get his way in heaven and earth. And I think if God has I used to teach 5 words of theology. I'd grab someone and say, I'm going to teach you theology. And they'd be, no, I don't want to learn theology. And so my 5 most important words of theology I ever taught people were, God is not a jerk. And if you have a theology where God's a jerk or is not noble and loving, then maybe that theology is not correct. And so sometimes people don't grieve because God wanted that so-and-so to die. God wanted that to happen. And I utterly reject that. And if God wanted my son Zane to die, well, then, you can F off because that just can't, that's not a noble. I'm a good dad. I don't want my kids to die. I mean, and how snake, serpent, in Matthew, how could a heavenly father that's not an a-hole, how could he want my son Zane to die? Now, that's very, 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 very different than good things coming out of tragedy. Good things can come out of tragedy, but that doesn't mean that God wanted the tragedy to happen. I've seen my son Zach struggle with things, and I didn't want the bad thing to happen, but then once it happens, I want him to grow through it. And you don't have to be happy all the time, and it's okay to grieve.
So, Stephen, another thing that I wanted to ask you about is, especially since you have so much experience with helping people in grief and also going through it yourself, can you give us some very important things that people need to either know or need to do in order when they're trying to help those who are grieving?
I mentioned if you want to comfort people who are grieving, particularly during the holidays, which is a tough time. Holidays trigger people. If you work in hospice, I'm told that hospice numbers drop dramatically at the holiday season because nobody wants to admit they're dying. Everyone wants to be positive, and people actually will not die until after Christmas. I was told that. I wasn't sure, and I Googled it, and it's a thing. I mean, it's really a thing. If you have anyone in hospice, they will tell you the census is down in their community right now of the patients they serve. And the same thing's true of grieving. People feel uncomfortable with it. So holidays can be a very tough time. But one of the things I already mentioned is don't tell people it'll be okay. Don't tell people that, don't tell them it'll be okay, and don't tell them, not to cry, and then just be present with them. And then it depends, and do they want you to own that for them or not? They may not want you to bring that right out to the table. That may be their private business, and so it's not appropriate for you to bring it out. But if someone is okay with you acknowledging their grieving, and I think it's really important that you get someone's permission before you talk about tough things. There's things in your life, Paul, that I feel like I could just talk to you about. There's other things that do I have the right? Have I earned the right to talk to you about that?
Well, and I remember when Zane died, that I did not. I saw it on Facebook. I saw everything happen right there. I was praying for you like crazy, but I did not intrude other than to say, hey, I love you, until you invited me or asked me, are you coming to the funeral, the memorial service? Yeah. And that was when I knew I had permission to enter into that space and to walk that with you and things like that. But it was really, I think it was really important to wait for that invitation. And I was incredibly honored when it came, because I didn't consider myself as one that would automatically get the invitation either. And I think that that's something that we need to realize, is we may think that we're in an inner circle and we may be in some levels of it, but there may be certain other people that they feel more comfortable grieving with. And we've got to be okay with it, because it's not about us. It's about the other person and what they're experiencing, and then what we can do to help when we're invited to.
And you may be in the inner circle, but the person may just not be comfortable doing the grieving. And
exactly.
And just let them be. And then when if they do own it, then be present with them. You don't need to say much. You know, a hand on a shoulder, a gentle acknowledgement. You don't need to say very much. Definitely don't give them any theology, and try not to encourage them. As crazy as that sounds, encouragement when you're grieving, you know, it feels like drinking poison. You don't want to be encouraged. You just want to have someone let you be where in the space you're in. You know, and then the holidays, what makes them really tough when you've lost someone. You know, Thanksgiving was the third Thanksgiving since Zane had passed, and it was the best Thanksgiving I've had in many, 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 many years. And my Zach and my youngest Zeke both really looked forward to it, and they really enjoyed it. That was incredibly meaningful to me, and that made Zane's lack of presence even worse, because I almost felt guilty for enjoying it. And so when you're having a good holiday, in spite of the loss of the person that's not there, that can make it tough, and you can almost feel guilty for having a good experience, because how dare you when they're not there. And the other thing is that if it's actually a deep relationship, and it's okay to say, particularly if the person's been gone a while, one of the things that happens, you know, it happens whether you've lost a loved one or a church plant has had a church plant die. That church plant had, you know, if it makes it 2 or 3 years and then dies, it had potential, it had hopes, it had dreams, and no one's ever going to know it. You invested your heart and soul, never going to know it. And you feel like people forget, and, you know, and did people forget so-and-so and not know about them? And you're the only one that remembers them. You're the only one that cares about them. That can be deeply acheful. And so I do remember this good thing about, you know, so-and-so, that if it's okay, and that takes a lot of emotional maturity to know whether or not it's okay, but acknowledging, you know, I do remember them. That can be really meaningful to someone who's grieving, particularly at the holidays.
That is a really good point, you know, in helping them to realize the loved ones that maybe that they've lost, you know, are not forgotten. You know, I think something that what you said, Stephen, in the sense of that you may not have earned the right to be able to grieve along with the person or be in the place to where do that. We should instead, a lot of people are made uncomfortable by grief and might think it's something to avoid, but have we thought about it as an honor to grieve with somebody, that you're in a place of honor if you can do that?
It is. I mean, you know, the night Zane died, my friend Kevin, I mean, who do you call on the worst night of your life? And one of the people I called is my friend Kevin, and he thought I was bugging about something that he was he thought God told him to do something, and he thought I was bugging him to do it. And that was, Zane died coming up 3 years ago, and he finally did the thing this past week. So he wouldn't answer the phone. So I sent the worst text of my life. I said, Kevin, Zane is dead, and I need you to come up here. And I felt brutal saying it, but he came up. And then, you know, the sirens and everybody cleared out. And then he said, I'm going to sit with you here on the couch tonight. And within 10 minutes, his head was back and he was asleep and snoring. But the fact that he was willing to be present with me meant the world to me. I didn't need words. I didn't need comfort. I didn't need encouragement. I just wanted someone to be present with me through it. And it actually didn't matter that he fell asleep, because I was too much on adrenaline to fall asleep. And I didn't for many, many hours. But the fact that he was present, and it is an honor to grieve with people.
So, Stephen, you know, one of the things that we really want to do as a part of GC Squared Live is help people to really know how to pray about things. So how can we pray for those who are grieving? Like, what is the best way to pray for them?
I think, and just as a side note, Paul, your tomorrow is tomorrow's December 14th, and Zane was born on December 14th. Tomorrow is his birthday, and he would have been 19 years old. So pretty interesting that you contacted me then. And so I just want to encourage people, if you're grieving, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to cry. And just to echo what you said, grieving does wear you out. I mean, I bought grievingwearsyouout.com just because people are so unaware of it. And it doesn't matter if you're grieving or grieving with someone, it will wear you out. Prayer's a tricky thing. I think that one of the things that, James says, pray for wisdom. I haven't memorized my childhood in the King James, but I think one of the things I would encourage people to pray for is for insight for how they can effectively care for the person that's grieving. That would be one thing, is that they ask for insight for their own selves so that they know how to care for the person that's grieving, and then ways to effectively comfort them, which is not it's not traditional comfort. I don't want to be encouraged. I don't want to be told it's okay. I don't want a pat on the back. And so encouragement can feel very weird to someone that's never been through a significant loss.
So I probably shouldn't admit to this, not on a show that's designed for Christians, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there and deal with the emails that come. That there have been times when the encouragement that I had for someone who is going through rough times was basically saying, look, I've got a couch, and if you want to bring over your bottle of choice, that's fine. I'll take your keys, and I'll be here to make sure that you're safe and that you can collapse on my couch, and it is just fine. And I will sit with you and grieve with you, and you can say whatever you want to, and it's not going to hurt. Not going to hurt me. Not going to hurt me. It'll hurt you, but it's not going to hurt me. I'll take whatever punches you need to give. And that's an unconventional comfort. That's an unconventional comfort that I know would be rejected in the church often, but it's one that I found that a lot of people have appreciated, even though they've not taken me up on it.
Well, and if they're going to make that choice, they're going to do it with or without you. And I would rather them do it with you in the safety of your care than without you.
That's exactly right.
I think what you're saying by that is I'm okay for all of you, your ugliness, your ugly cries, your grieving, the darkness that comes with grieving. I think that's what you're really giving. You're giving them permission to be real with you. And often, particularly in Christian circles, people don't feel safe to be real with one another.
Yeah.
Stephen, if people want to learn more about what you have to say and about grief and things like that, where do they go? What do they do?
You mentioned early in the show that people, kind of get tired of hearing about grieving, and I share a lot of my life on social media. And eventually, after Zane died, I realized I need to keep sharing, but I'm almost bumming me out and people out. So I put up a special Facebook page just for that. So C.S. Lewis took a cerebral approach, a grief observed, and Zane died on a Monday night, and I officiated his memorial service on a Saturday night. When it was over, I'm like, I don't know how I got through that, but that, like, I guess I really am a writer because I got to write about this. I have to. And I thought there's no way that I'm going to observe this grief. I'm not going to observe this intellectually. I'm going to express about it. So I bought a griefexpress.com, and then I have a Facebook page, Grief Express, where I share my stuff. And then I plan eventually to write a grieving book. The title's Don't Grieve, and the subtitle is Unless You Want to Be Healthy, Healthy People Grieve. But if people want to know my grieving stuff, they can find it on Facebook, A Grief Expressed.
Well, Stephen, as soon as you read write that book, I want to read it. So,
that's right. I want to.
And I just want to thank you so much for being with us on the show. It's an extreme honor. And so we know that you don't have very much time. So we can let you go at this time if this is a good time for you.
Sounds good. Just encourage people. Healthy people grieve. Grieving is how you heal. It's okay to cry. I say that to people all the time. And if your heart is aching, here's something you can say. What do you say when someone is lost? I can't believe I forgot to tell you this. This is the magical words right here. This is what you can say every time. My heart aches with yours. Mm. That's what you say when someone has lost something. If you mean it. That is so much better than it'll get better, it'll be okay, or any other the nonsense that is well-meaning but damaging.
So the principle of weeping with those who weep.
It's almost biblical. Right. It's almost biblical.
It's almost like it's there somewhere. Stephen, that's a great
thank you. Thank you for being here, brother. I appreciate it, and appreciate it a lot. And Yeah. So
I
we'll
was
talk to you
referring
later.
to the cup.
Hey, I love my mugs. This is my Christmas mug, comfort and joy. So, all right.
There
Yes.
you go. I
Paul,
love
I
it. It's
love
a
you
good
very
mug.
much. Keep up the good work and the lives that you're changing. It's very meaningful to see what you do and the lives you change and the people you help. Keep up the good work.
So
Thanks
thanks,
so
Stephen.
much.
God bless. Bye.
God
All right.
bless. So wow, Paul, I think the important thing for us to remember is that grief goes beyond words a lot of times. And it goes beyond it goes beyond the problem of grief goes beyond intellectualism and reasoning through things and stuff like that. And that's why we have to address the emotions and let them happen. You and I did a podcast, an article on how to love those who are dealing with chronic illness. And really, a lot of those same principles go across the board when it comes to anybody who's going through something really hard.
Yeah.
And, so if anybody wants to read that, it's on beckewing.com, BECKEWING.com. It's called Behind the Smile. And like I said, we have both a podcast and also an article for you guys to read it. But some of the things that we have said that when it comes to how to help people with grieving, again, when it comes to isolation, spend time with them. Be willing, make sure that of course, you have to get permission to spend time with them. But, the idea is that is the thing that they need from you the most is someone, a lasagna is nice, but maybe you sitting down and eating that lasagna with them, that's even nicer. And,
yeah. And I think the other thing that Stephen brought up that is just huge is I would ask you guys during this holiday are you the kind of person that someone can be real with in their grief? Are you okay with all the nasty bits coming out? Are you okay with the messy cries and the snot bubbles? Are you okay with things thrown against the wall? If that's what it is. And I'm not ever saying that anyone accept abuse on themselves. That's not what I'm talking about. But are you okay with being there and loving someone through all their messiness? And I think that that's the deep work. If we really want to help people through grief, the only way we're going to get those invitations is if someone feels that we can be that person for them in the middle of their pain. And that takes a lot of hard work. And that takes a lot of allowing Jesus to do stuff in us that we can't do ourselves.
I think as a main point of that is the fact that we need to be in it for the long haul. Whenever there's somebody who's going through something really tough, we have to be willing to be like, this may be a long road. And, I need to pursue this person. Don't give up. Don't give up on them. Keep on going on because it's not stopping for them. And sometimes it feels like a betrayal when people begin to walk the road with you and then they get tired and give up or just like, yeah, this is too much for me and leave. That actually brings a wound in of itself. So make sure that if you're there to grieve with people, make sure that you are going to see it out the entire way. So again, if you want some more tips on that, maybe some specificities, go ahead and go and look at our article online. But in just a moment, we're going to be praying for people who are grieving. And so if you're watching and you know somebody who's grieving, or maybe you are somebody who's grieving during this time, we'd love to pray for you. So just put in the comments your prayer requests and we will pray for you online. And then not to mention also in the comments, as we're praying for people, as we're praying regarding the subject, post your prayers for others. And so that people are encouraged by that with each other. So, I think, we've been talking a lot about ways to help those who are grieving, Paul. Like, in other words, we know somebody who's grieving. What do we need to know? What do we need to say or not say or something? Which, of course, the big principle is grace. Give people grace. But I mean, the thing that let's flip it around to like for those who are grieving. I think Stephen said some of the things like it's okay to struggle. It's okay to feel pain. It's okay. Be patient with yourself because God is actually patient with you too. So,
Yeah.
you know, be patient with yourself. But I think the big thing is that allow yourself also to listen for God and to wait for his comfort. Because sometimes when we are so upset about something, you know, we cry and we cry out to God and we cry out to God. We forget, hey, maybe God's trying to answer back. So just listen. Be willing
Yeah.
to listen for his answer or for
And
his
it may
comfort.
and it may be a while for that to come. And don't feel and what I would say is, once again, give yourself grace. Don't feel guilty that you're not hearing God's voice. I
Right.
know that during the times when I've been at the most intense grief or even intensely grieving with other people, I can't hear God's voice. If it weren't for his written word, then I wouldn't be able to even know what he was saying. And so the other thing I would say on top of this too is, I like Stephen said, that, if you may have lost a dog and your friend may have lost a loved one. But to sit there and say that losing my dog is less than or greater than losing the loved one is wrong, because for each person, it is intensely personal, and it could be the worst grief they've ever expressed in their life. And so you might be in a place where you're dealing with grief right now. It could be the loss of a job and an identity that you have. It could be the something out of your control that caused you to not be able to do what you feel you were made to do. It could be the loss of a marriage. It could be the loss of just about anything, those deep things. Give yourself permission to grieve, and don't sit there and say, well, I really can't grieve because I didn't lose, someone. They didn't die or whatever. You need to embrace the pain that you're experiencing, give yourself permission to feel that pain, and then take that pain to God and allow, and you know what he's going to find, what you're going to find there? God's going to sit next to you. He's going to put his arm around you and he's going to encourage you to cry.
And sometimes some of these losses that may cause grief, other people might consider petty, and I think that's what you were saying so far as a pet. Another one might be, and I'm just going to throw it out there. If you're single and you were dating somebody for a while, and they broke up with you around and everything, and right now you're experiencing the loss of that relationship. That's okay. I mean, because whenever you're in a dating relationship, you actually are developing a friendship. So it's not just the fact that, oh, I'm not going to get married and now I'm just sad. No, it's you lost a friend.
Yeah.
And, and someone who was becoming very close to you. So,
and as Stephen said,
feel sad.
As Stephen said, you've lost the potential.
Mm-hmm.
It's that loss of that potential relationship that you're also grieving. And that is painful.
So the thing is that, and we said this to remind this of people who are helping others who are grieving. Now we're going to remind you, grieving is not a sin. The doubt that you may be having right now is not a sin. The crisis of faith that you're in right now is not a sin. Because, a lot of time, and God often uses even these times to be able to help us come through a journey. So you're not wrong for going through dark times or going through, struggles and emotional struggles and doubts and maybe some scary thoughts that cross your brain, so don't be patient with yourself and realize that God isn't condemning you because you're going through this particular pain. So right now we're going to go ahead and get in.
One more thing before we go into that. I do want to say this. If your grief has reached the darkest place to where you're contemplating taking your life, then you need help. And there are lots of resources out there. This world is a better place because of you, and we don't want to lose you. And you can reach out to Suicide Hotline. There are lots of places where you can get help. And you need to find that help because we need you around. There is a bigger story, and this grief is unbearable and it's terrible. But can we push through it together and see the other side? And I don't even know how to say that, but we want you to get the help. We want you to get help.
All right. So just wanted to be able to say that again, if you thank you so much, our production wizard, for putting up the suicide hotline there. But right now we're just going to be praying for anybody out there who's grieving and just praying for you. And again, if there's anyone out there who has a prayer request, just go ahead and send it to us and we'll be happy to pray for you. All right. So, Paul, do you want to begin?
Sure. Let me go ahead and start. Father, wow, what a topic. But I want to thank you that you're a God who grieves. You've cried over Israel. You've cried over your people over and over and over again. You can't read your word from Old Testament to the very end of the Bible without knowing that you're a God who loves and cares deeply. And if you're a God who loves and cares deeply, that means you can be deeply disappointed. And if you can be deeply disappointed, that means you grieve as well. You grieve when we choose poorly, but you grieve when we grieve and when we're hurt. You grieved when Jesus died. And he grieved over us. And so, God, I am grateful that you're a God who grieves, that you're a God who doesn't sit there and downplay human emotion or try to fit it into some meta narrative and give it some higher purpose and meaning, but that, God, you, I believe in my heart of hearts, would bring the coffee and sit down next to us, pour us a cup, and sit there and cry right with us. Mm-hmm. And we just want to thank you for that. I think Stephen said it best, that the best thing that we can do when helping other people through grief is to ask you, Father, for wisdom. Wisdom to not say stupid things. The ability to be alongside someone the way Jesus was and is. Mm-hmm. And God, we just ask for that so that we would not ourselves be trite, that we would not be a barrier to someone else's healing. But God, that you would use us and that we would be able to bring you honor and glory in the way that we demonstrated compassion to our fellow brother and sister, our fellow human that was created by you and is in some of the worst spots of their life. Father, help us. Help us to do it well.
Lord, I personally also want to also pray for Stephen. Thank you, God, for his testimony. The privilege of having him to come talk with us. God, with the anniversary of the birth of his son coming up, I just pray that you would just have your presence be strong with him. Help him to be able to feel you being there with him. God, you said that you're a good father, and good fathers give good gifts to their children. How much more will you give the Holy Spirit to those who ask you? And so, God, I just ask for your Holy Spirit presence to be strong on Stephen, that you would just feel your arms wrapped around him. And Lord, help him to just know that you're grieving along with him. And God, I just pray that you would honor him and that you would bring him blessing in his life. And that you would bring more people into his life that he can feel safe to grieve with. And that would honor the memory of his son. I also pray, God, that you would help give him insight as to know how to be able to help the people around him and how to be able to express his journey to others. As he says he's thinking about writing a book, I pray that others would be able to be comforted through his story.
Yeah.
Lord, I just pray for all those out there who are grieving. Lord, you came to be with us. And you came during really hard circumstances. And you revealed yourself to the lowliest of the low. And we thank you, God, that you're someone who wants to identify with our hardships, who wants to help bear our griefs and our sorrows. That you're a high priest. You're not a high priest that can't be touched. You're not someone who's just like, I can't understand what you're going through. No, God, you say that you understand. And so, God, I just pray that you would be ever near every heart that is hurting, as you say that you are. You are near the brokenhearted. And God, I just ask that you would set these prisoners free this Christmas. And that you would bring others in your body around these people to comfort and help. And help us, God, to know how to do that, how to act as you would act, how to love as you are loved. And part of that, God, I ask you to put in our hearts a burden for people who are grieving.
Yeah.
That our hearts truly would ache along with theirs. That it's not just a thing we would say to them, but we actually would ache along with them. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, thanks so much, guys, for this episode. Please share this episode with your friends. Because you don't know who's hurting right now. And, so make sure you're posting this to your Facebook, sharing it with your friends, and just saying, hey, this is for you if you're hurting, or maybe this is for you if you know someone who's hurting. Because then that way we can be able to spread Christ's peace and help during this time.
Right. And the other thing is that allow us to introduce the hard topics for you. We allowed Stephen to say some things on this show. I've said some things on this show. We've wrestled with some things on this show, and you don't have to agree with everything. But what we want you to do is to use this show to have important conversations that could change the way that you interact with people who are grieving right now. So allow us to be that jumping point into some deep waters and wrestle through that. And when you do, we would love to hear how those conversations went. And so you can send that email to, I think, Beck, you have an email address that they send things to, is it?
Yes, it's to beckewingmedia@gmail.com. So beckewingmedia@gmail.com. So BECKEWING media@gmail.com. So you can send that to us there. But, also if you there's this link that you can always share. We also put our recorded episodes up on our YouTube channel, and we'll put that link inside the comments. And so you can always go, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and be able to also share that from there. Keep on watching our episodes because this Tuesday, so this is a part of our series of sharing Christmas with those that need Christ most. And so we're going to be focusing in on, basically the poor shut-ins, that kind of people, how to reach out to those people during this time on Tuesday night, 9:15 Eastern Standard Time and 6:15 Pacific Time. So make sure that you're tuning in for that as well. But yes.
And one more thing, we do have a Patreon page, and one of our technical wizards will post the link to that here. And if you want to support this show in any way, whether it's $5, $10, or $100 on a monthly basis. And that would be huge and allow us to bring on more guests to expand into other shows and topics and things like that. We have a lot of ideas, but we don't always have the ways to fund those ideas and increase the quality of the show and the content of the show. And if you can contribute there, that would be huge.
Any worthwhile venture has its costs. And if you love what we do, show us that you love what we do by being a part of our Patreon page. We have some benefits for you. So thanks so much. And so Paul and I are signing out.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.